When ranking these skills, I will be taking into account the frequency that they get used and also the impact that using these skills has. Hopefully it goes without saying, this is my own casual opinion, and do please let me know how your opinions differ and why. And just before we jump into it, we do get 4 characters. You can probably have someone with proficiency in each of these skills anyway, so it's not as if you have to pick one over the other. But at the same time, some of these skills are very important indeed. I will be going over them in the order that they appear in a character sheet. So starting off with athletics. And what it can let you do is shove and throw people. Now, I'm not in combat yet, and I have advantage on this because I'm hidden, this shove. But let's start this. So in terms of frequency of use, this could get used in every single combat. It's up to you, really. In terms of its impact of use, well, you can see there, I just shoved someone, and you can do damage by shoving people off high places or outright kill them by shoving them into an abyss. Something else we can do is throw enemies, and how far you can throw them depends on your strength. Also, oh, athletics failed. There we are. A couple of interesting things. Firstly, there's currently a visual bug. The difficulty class is 0, apparently. Even though I got 10, I failed. Secondly, if you do throw an enemy successfully, they land prone. Now, it's good that athletics and acrobatics are kind of next to each other, because something else athletics can do is help you resist being shoved. The skill used to resist being shoved is the highest out of either athletics or acrobatics. I'm going to put this in S tier, because the frequency is as high as you want it to be, actually, and the impact of it can be very high indeed. It can help prevent opportunity attacks if you do shove an enemy out of the way. You can shove or throw enemies and kill them from that action, and it can help you resist being shoved as well. One thing I would say about it, though, is that even in combat, there are other ways of knocking people back, such as pushing attack. Now, I don't have an action ready, but pushing attack can knock people back, thunder wave, gust of wind, arrows of roaring thunder. So it's not like pushing people back is unique to athletics. So next up is acrobatics. Now, this will be very difficult for me to show you, but acrobatics' only real use is to resist being shoved. The frequency of use of acrobatics isn't perhaps overly, it's not very high. It really depends on the enemy and what they choose to do. But there are times where it's kind of a case of when you need it, you really want to have it. For example, when you're fighting Nia, you can be shoved into lava. At that point, you want either one of these two to be very high. If you've got a good bonus in the athletics skill, you don't actually need a high bonus in your acrobatics though. So pick one or the other. Athletics is definitely higher than acrobatics though, because athletics can be used in an offensive manner as well as defensive, whereas acrobatics is only defensive. Next up is Sleight of Hand. This has several different uses, so it can be used to pick locks, disarm traps, steal things, pickpocket, and there are a few conversations where you get a choice to use your Sleight of Hand. So for example here, I have found a trap, and if I want to disarm it, I need to use Sleight of Hand. Now with picking locks, we could potentially just break this chest open, although I'm not sure my characters here could at the moment. And there are spells, I haven't got it yet, I've only just got to level 3 here. But the knock spell can open up locked chests, locked doors, but we're not always going to be able to break things open. There are sometimes keys as well. So perhaps for picking locks, Sleight of Hand isn't as important, but the frequency of these checks is so high. Now linked to stealing, I just want to quickly show this, pickpocketing. This target here is the number that needs to be shown on the die. This isn't after bonuses have been added. And the target number we need is a mixture of how heavy something is and also its value. So let's say I go for something a bit heavier. I need an 11 or higher. Surely no one will notice. To steal it, and it worked. But perhaps, what was it? Here, we need 12 or higher, probably because of the value more than the weight. We failed. So the difficulty class is 17, but it said 11 in the pickpocket window. Like that was the minimum I needed. This really goes up to S tier just because of the frequency of use, and I don't tend to steal very much in my playthroughs, but you can get so much stuff if you do decide to steal things. Yeah, so useful. Stealth is next. Now this keeps you hidden, and there are some conversation choices that require stealth. Not very many, but they do happen. So Lae'zella's in combat. She started a fight here with the owlbear, and I'm hidden. And while we're hiding, if I'm outside the vision cone, I will not be seen, and is not dependent whatsoever on my stealth ability. If I walk into the vision cone, I will have to make a stealth check, and we can see next to the cursor is kind of a half-filled sun. If I walk in there, I'll have to make a stealth check. Or in fact there, I was just spotted due to dark vision. And so I didn't even get to roll stealth. because it depended on the enemy a bit. Now, before combat starts, you can roll to attack someone, and you do roll a stealth check, and it's possible that you can kind of abuse it and do it lots and lots. Whereas if combat has started like here, as soon as I roll, I just go into combat. I'm a bit underwhelmed by stealth. Yes, there's one particularly good use, which is with greater invisibility, level 4 spell that requires concentration. And every time you attack, you have a stealth check you have to make, starting at DC 15, and it goes up every time you do an attack. If you really want to use stealth, then yes, you can use greater invisibility and you can stay hidden. But if you're outside a vision cone, you don't roll stealth. So this might be a bit dependent on your play style. Whereas if you're using greater invisibility and you're starting lots of combats from hidden, maybe S or A. Apart from those two play styles, I just don't think it's that great, because if you're outside the vision cone, you don't even need to roll it. It's kind of useless. So I'm going to leave it in B tier. So Arcana is next, the first skill dependent on intelligence. It does allow you to use a few enchanted items, and I came across this more during Act 3, I think, than the other acts. So here's an early example of Arcana.
This book is far lighter than it should
Down
be.
the Dank Crypt, you'll find it within the first hour or two of the game. In fact, I'll get Gale to do it because he's slightly better at this. And also, dependent on your class, you might get some checks that are actually a little bit easier. So because I passed, I'll get some extra information. This is an example of where Arcana is used to interact with an enchanted item. But Arcana, I'm going to put it at B tier because it does open up some extra conversation choices. Can change a few things like in Act 1. I will try and avoid spoilers as much as I can, so I'm not going to say exactly where, but it's not the be-all and end-all. It doesn't matter too much at the end of the day whether you pass these skill checks or not. So in terms of frequency, yes, they happen every now and again. The impact of use, it's not the highest impact, not as high as, say, Athletics or Sleight of Hand, but still fairly useful as things go. History is next and lets you recall information about past events. The frequency is relatively low, I would say, compared to many of the other skill checks, and it really rarely changes the outcome of anything important. It's good for finding out about the lore of the game, the Forgotten Realms, Sword Coast, that sort of area. So maybe on your first playthrough, probably a bit higher. So one example here is down in Grimforge area, and we're speaking to Stonemason Kith, and it will tell us if we pass anyway. Just trying to make sure we do.
Two styles.
You know, we've got information, two styles, two eras.
The statue was carved from newer stone.
For me, maybe my first playthrough, probably like B, maybe C. It also depends on how much importance you put on finding out about like the background of the game, the lore of the game. But on multiple playthroughs, it really isn't that important. So for me personally, now that I've played through the game several times, I'm going to leave it down in D. I don't particularly find it very important, especially when I'm playing honor mode. I'm going to be thinking about the things towards the top. But if you're all into like, yeah, the lore of the game, background of the Forgotten Realms, and you love reading about all of that, then it's probably going to be much higher for you. The next intelligence-based skill is Investigation. So Investigation is used both actively and passively, and it helps you like spot or solve clues, but it can also sometimes be used to spot things like this. The frequency is kind of middling. Of all the intelligence checks, though, it's probably the highest. Now, I don't have any hard information on how often the different skill checks are used. So when I say the frequency is high or low, it is pretty much based off my own anecdotal experience. But coming back to Investigation, the frequency I say is middling. The outcome and the impact is pretty high. So I'm going to leave it at A tier because it does allow you to complete some quests potentially more quickly, more easily, or different ways, or find some hidden objects. Nature is next, and a bit like history, it's mostly just to find out some information about surrounding areas and, well, nature. Sometimes it opens up extra options, extra paths, but it's not actually that common. So for example here, it opens up 2 more options, but most of the time it is just for information. This is good information for the player, for you. But your characters don't really benefit much from passing these checks most of the time. It doesn't impact your playthrough in the game that much. A bit like with history for nature, maybe the first playthrough it's much higher. On later playthroughs it's much lower, and I really don't value it after playing through several times now. It's not that important to me. And I'm going to skip forwards to religion as well. Same idea. Your first playthroughs where you do the checks you haven't done before, It can be very interesting, very worthwhile, and you might get some inspiration from passing some skill checks. Inspiration, there's quite a lot of it around. But also, this does depend on preference, right? Again, this is just my casual opinion. Moving on to animal handling next, and this is the first of the wisdom skills, which go from animal handling up to survival. Now, I desperately want animal handling to be S tier, but kind of the unfortunate truth is that animal handling can just be replaced by a potion of speak with animals in most cases. For example, here with tough, this isn't the best example because I got a fish. So we've got animal handling. If Lae'zel takes a potion of speak with animals instead, I can just ask her to move over and not even have to do a skill check. Often though, with speak with animals, the skill check of animal handling can be replaced with your charisma skill checks. The frequency of these kind of goes up and down during the game. In Act 1, there's quite a few animal handling checks. Act 2, it kind of dies down a bit, and Act 3 perhaps goes up a tiny bit more. But since we can get access to speak with animals relatively easily, I mean, look at this. The potions of animal speaking are so cheap as well. There's a race that gets this, several classes, subclass of barbarian as well, the wild heart, that I would advise really just use speak with animals instead of animal handling. But like I said at the beginning, you've probably got enough different characters to get someone using each different skill anyway. So I'm gonna leave it in C tier. Kind of sad at myself for putting it there, but like I said, since we've got speak with animals, it's just not really needed. If you're not using speak with animals, then perhaps A or S tier, but it's just replaced by a very easy spell to acquire. Insight is next and helps you kind of determine whether someone is lying and perhaps what they expect or they're about to do is kind of your intuition about people's behavior. More often than not, it's passive rather than active, so you don't know when you're going to use it. It's not always the case.
God, you're a coward.
So there we are. Passive. I didn't know, well, I knew it was going to happen, which is why I'm recording here, but there's no indication as to when it's going to happen. And it opens up often very different dialogue choices. I'm going to leave in A, just because the frequency isn't that high, but the person doing the conversation is the one that rolls it. It's not like every character gets to roll insight. The impact, again, is relatively high because I actually got different options on the fact that I passed the insight check. Medicine is next, and this one is so dependent on whether you have a particular subclass or not in your party or in your camp, and that subclass is a transmutation wizard. If you do not have a transmutation wizard, I think this is down here at the bottom again, where it doesn't affect the outcome of stories or quests very much. But if you do have a transmutation wizard, the way it affects you, I've just got a highlighting from camp here, is from level 2 onwards. When you brew a potion, if you succeed a DC 15 medicine check, then you make 2 of them instead. So I've got guidance going. I gave him proficiency in medicine and upped his wisdom to give myself some sort of bonus. So if I come here and I want to make an elixir of bloodlust, I succeeded. So now I've got 2 instead of 1. So if you are using a transmutation wizard, I think just S, you get twice as many potions, which is twice as good. If you don't have a transmutation wizard, I'd leave it down in C or D. And for me, this is one of the most playstyle dependent, kind of subclass dependent skill there is. I almost wish I'd made 2 of them now. I'm going to leave it up in S just because it can be so important. And now we have perception, which pretty much helps you spot hidden things. And occasionally does come up in a conversation.
Light on my feet.
So coming over to here. There we are. This is how I found the trap earlier. It's not just for finding traps, it's for finding hidden buttons, finding hidden areas, allows you access hidden areas, different places. And I would say this is super important. The lovely thing about this skill though, is that assuming you're doing it passively, all 4 of my characters would have made a perception check. I would say this is one of the skills where it's very important to have at least one person who is at least proficient in perception, if not actually got a high wisdom or expertise in perception, because it can save you so much hassle of dealing with traps and also finding places to go. And so it probably comes with no surprise that perception goes up to S tier. Survival is next, and this is such a strange one. I'm not sure they should have implemented survival this way. So it helps you find hidden chests for the most part. It can afford you some information, and it does come up in a few conversations. But the most frequent use of it is there a hidden chest nearby? Now, the silly, weird thing is,
Proceeding.
I don't know if she's going to pass a survival check here or not. Okay, she failed, right? You might think, oh no, that's the end. It doesn't matter. If you know where you failed the survival check, you can still dig up the chest. No problem. And you get some loot, which is cool. Now, in terms of frequency, I'd say it's high enough, but it doesn't matter whether you pass or fail. There is an option in custom difficulty mode to turn off failed survival checks, which I think is really what should have happened. But if you've got experience in the game, you know exactly where to go to find these chests. So I find the more you play this game, the less and less survival becomes important, and you can pretty much ignore it. If you're playing the custom difficulty modes, where you don't see failed survival checks, I would say that this is definitely much higher. But if you're not playing that mode, it's basically critical miss because you just don't need it. You fail it and you can still dig up the chest. What does it matter whether you've got proficiency or if you're good in survival or not? It doesn't matter. And then we come to the charisma skills, going from deception down to persuasion. I'm going to cover deception and intimidation at the same time because they've got very much the same feelings about them. So deception and intimidation are actually persuasion, but I'll come to persuasion later because it is a bit different. So deception and intimidation give us choices in conversations to change, actually, usually, the outcome of what's going to happen. So I've got deception and intimidation. Now, since I'm a half-orc, I'll try an intimidation. Let's give ourselves guidance. Yeah. Ah, look at that.
Well,
And so, in this case, I don't have to do this combat. The point here is deception, intimidation give us alternative routes through the game. So the impact to them is very high. Frequency is not quite as frequent as persuasion, which is why they're not going to be S tier, but definitely A tier picks, because I do find that persuasion comes up more often and in more important points, especially in Act 2. So performance is next for our penultimate skill check. Now, as you saw, it is possible to have performance checks in conversations. Something else you can do with performance, though, don't know how well this will work. I don't think this guy's actually proficient in performance, so very unlikely to pass here. If I had passed, I would have got gold from these NPCs, but a maximum of 1 gold per NPC. You also saw that it did gather NPCs around, which can be used to set up either pickpockets or sneaking or a big AoE, but you don't need to be proficient in performance to start gathering people around. Now I've got Will here, who is not proficient in performance, but it still does gather people around. We're going to leave this in B tier, because the frequency of the high impact choices are relatively low, but it still does have its uses inside conversations. And lastly, we have persuasion. Now, persuasion can be used inside skill checks, and honestly, it's probably the most frequently used charisma skill and often with the highest impact. That alone would make it S tier. But in addition to that, the price of items is partially dependent on your persuasion skill. So without donating any gold and increasing the attitude of Vicar Humbletoes here, I've got a minus 30% discount, which means reduces the price by 30%. And if I click on the other characters, it says the absurd urge is trading. Fine. But if I then do the same thing with Starion, whose charisma is very low in this run, his persuasion is -2, and the discount is +6%, so things are much more expensive. So this Mantle of the Holy Warrior is 2,016 gold for Astarion, and for Tav it is 1,449 gold. That's near enough a 600 gold difference. Based on persuasion alone, this cloak is 39% more expensive for Astarion as it is for Tav here. As easily S tier. Can skip, especially for Act 2 anyway. 3, maybe 4 bosses, or at least 1 phase of a boss. And 3 other bosses by persuasion alone really can change the outcome of what you're doing. So for me, overall, the ones towards the top are the ones that are having the highest impact. The ones towards the bottom, there are either other ways of doing it, or for these here, once I've played through the game once, they become much less useful. But as I said, just my casual opinion. You let me know how your opinions differ. And one last reminder, you've got enough characters to cover all of them anyway if you're being careful. Thank you very much for watching to all the members of my channel, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.